Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Phalaenopsis orchid, an orchid that I'm sure most of us are familiar with and is probably very close to our hearts. So a lot of people start off, when they're starting an orchid collection, the first orchid that they get is a Phalaenopsis. And even for people who aren't particularly into orchids as collectors, can still enjoy a beautiful Phalaenopsis in their home. The Phalaenopsis complex hybrid has been bred for ease of care and to be able to survive and thrive in our home environments and the conditions we can offer it there. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Phalaenopsis orchid, and I will also show you a couple of my more novelty Phalaenopsis hybrids and the Summer Blooming species, but I think that they probably deserve their own separate care tutorial because the care does differ slightly. Overall though, I do give them very similar care, so I kind of wanted to touch on the other Phalaenopsis that I have, but stick more in this video to care of the complex hybrid or garden centre Phalaenopsis that people would typically get as one of their first orchids. Now, as you can see just from the size variation alone, the Phalaenopsis is a very diverse group of orchids, and the complex hybrids that we get in the garden centres come into this in the diversity that they display as complex hybrids of different species. They exhibit different traits and different sizes based on this. So in general, Phalaenopsis are warm to hot growers. They come from parts of the world that are warmer to hotter, and therefore they like temperatures that are above 18 degrees Celsius ideally. Now they can go to sort of 16 degrees Celsius, but your plant won't be quite as happy. They are warm to hot growers and they do need a warmer environment to correspond with this. So you may think that I've got some very large Phalaenopsis here, but I've also got some very small ones, and these are all full size. They've all flowered for me and they are not growing really that much in size. As the years go by, they will get gradually bigger, but they're not going to get that much bigger than what they are now. So this is one of the miniature Phalaenopsis, and we've got a couple of more compact Phalaenopsis that still fall into that kind of miniature Phalaenopsis category. And then we've got a couple of really giant phals, which are just your typical garden centre Phalaenopsis, but they do grow very huge. So there is quite a lot of diversity in this, and this one will probably get quite a bit bigger. It's turning into quite the giant. Now, Phalaenopsis, as you can see, do take up quite a lot of space when they get to this size, so it's worth bearing in mind that if you do want a smaller or more compact Phalaenopsis, to try and look out for these smaller, more compact varieties, as the bigger leafed ones can get very huge after several years with good care in the correct environments. In addition to their large size, you may also have to accommodate very long aerial roots, which seemingly defy gravity. This is absolutely normal. They are epiphytic orchids. So what this means is they would use these roots in nature to both seek out moisture, but also to secure themselves to trees. Therefore, it's perfectly natural for them to be spewing out of their pots and roots going everywhere. And I'd even say it's a sign of a healthy orchid when you've got a very big plant with lots of roots. But again, it's worth considering when you're accommodating them in a smaller space. While we're on the subject of roots, another interesting thing about the Phalaenopsis orchid is its ability to branch new root tips from existing roots, and even from roots that you would think were dried and desiccated and potentially dead, can spring to life with new root growth. As you can see here on this Phalaenopsis, is particularly evident, where previously the root tips have dried and then new roots have emerged, which is why it's always worth leaving a questionable root on if possible. If it's not squishy and black and clearly dead, if it just looks dried and desiccated, there's always this possibility that they can push out new root growth. A clear example of the ability of these orchids to branch roots is shown here as well. So this is an existing root that has branched along at several points and also has a growing root tip, as you can see there. So they have this ability to branch pretty much in an unlimited fashion from the existing roots, which is a really interesting trait and means that even if the root tip is damaged, you're likely to have a new root that will emerge from the existing root. Now, this Phalaenopsis orchid may appear a bit unruly, and this is quite common as they become more established in your collection for them to lean forward in this way. In nature, they would grow hanging off a tree, and the leaning nature of their growth habit means that they are less susceptible to crown rot when it rains. Whereas if they're growing in pots, the first few leaves will maintain a very upright fashion, but then as they get larger, they do tend to lean. This could be towards the light, although this particular orchid has been grown directly under a LED lamp, so the light source has been from above, but also from the side because there is a window quite near where it lives on the top shelf. So this leaning habit isn't really that it was leaning towards the main light source. And this is quite common. Most of my Phalaenopsis orchids do this, and I just think this is a natural part of keeping them because they are attempting to kind of mimic their natural growth pattern. Now, I've spoken a bit about their temperature requirements and also the size features of the different types of Phalaenopsis. What I haven't really spoken about is watering. Now, I keep my Phalaenopsis mainly in semi-hydro with leca, which is a form of clay bead, which implies a reservoir of water at the bottom. The clay then wicks the water all through, so you've got a constantly moist yet airy environment because the spheres constantly leave little air pockets. Now, this is a non-traditional media for planting orchids, although it is becoming more common. It does have its setbacks. I also have some Phalaenopsis orchids in more traditional media, mixes of bark and sphagnum moss, and this is absolutely fine also. Depending on your environment, you may want to use a more bark heavy mix, or if you've got a very dry, hot environment, then it's worth putting a bit more moss in the pot. If you're limited by the orchid mixes that you can buy in the shops, try to look for a good quality orchid mix with nice solid chunks of bark rather than one that's very crumbly or with lots of dust in, because I've personally had several issues with very dusty, bitty orchid mixes that you can buy in the shops. So it is worth trying and find a better quality orchid media. It'll definitely pay off in the long run. If you're starting out with orchids and you want to give your orchid the best possible care, go for a nice chunky solid bark mix, not crumbly at all. In terms of lighting, I keep all of my Phalaenopsis under artificial LED lights. They're lights that I keep them under are cool white 1100 lumen bulbs, but unfortunately it's very difficult to quantify the amount of good healthy light that your plant is getting in terms of lumens, because you want it to be getting sufficient red and blue wavelength lights. However, for Phalaenopsis, this really doesn't matter too much. I've flowered them under quite low light levels. They're really not too fussy. I'd say the more of the issue is actually too high light levels. So if you're keeping them on a windowsill, then I would just make sure that you've got some shading across from them, or just take them off the windowsill and put them slightly to the side if it's a southern facing windowsill where you're getting lots and lots of very bright sunlight, because that bright direct sunlight is a bit too strong for them. They're adapted to living on trees under tree canopies in rainforests, and they're constantly going to be receiving bright filtered dappled light that filters through the leaves, so they aren't adapted to take direct sun for prolonged periods of time. So they won't tolerate very harsh, very strong lighting for prolonged periods. A good sign to watch for is when you start noticing yellowing appearing on the leaves, or in the case of Phalaenopsis that have purpling in the flowers, you may notice that the leaves actually begin to turn a very purplish colour. This is anthocyanin pigments coming up to try and protect the orchid from high light. It's nothing to worry about, but it is that kind of warning that the orchid is just starting to feel that it's a bit too much light that it's getting. So when that happens, I would just move the orchid slightly out of the direct sunlight that it's getting. And I've had this when I was first starting out keeping phals on windowsills, and I just moved them back from the windowsill and slightly off to the side, and they perked up pretty much immediately. So I've covered temperature, size and watering, and also positioning and lighting. But one thing that I haven't discussed is fertilizing. Phalaenopsis are actually very heavy feeders, especially when they're in active growth. When it's cooler, you might notice that the growth slows down, or when they're flowering, they may go through slower periods of vegetative growth and grow less roots and less leaves because they're diverting that energy to the flowers. However, when they're in very active growth, they are very heavy feeders. So at that point, you want to be feeding weekly, which implies a much reduced dose of fertilizer compared to what the manufacturer recommends, but instead of feeding once a month, feeding every week with its watering. So whenever it gets water, it also gets nutrients, and that mimics better what it would actually get in the rainforest. Whenever it rains in a rainforest, there would be rotting leaf debris, bird excrement, all sorts of rotting sort of biomass washing down onto the roots, and that would be providing the fertilizer. So every time it rains in the rainforest, they'd be getting fertilized, and that's what they're adapted to. They don't like very heavy doses of fertilizer as it can burn the roots. So it's the best way to feed them because that's the way they've evolved to accept nutrients. So I think that kind of covers it really, and that's kind of my general Phalaenopsis care tips. Now if we look at more Novelty Phalaenopsis, which are Phalaenopsis that are hybridized with a subgenre of Phalaenopsis called the Polychilos. These ones are typically known as Summer Blooming Phals or Novelty Phalaenopsis, require slightly different care from the complex hybrid Phalaenopsis that I've mentioned. So if we take a look at some of the Phalaenopsis that we've got in front of us at the moment, you can see some clear and marked differences from the complex hybrid Phalaenopsis that I had on the table a minute ago. In general, the species Phalaenopsis, or their primary or close to species hybrids, are a much more compact group of Phalaenopsis that have a much shorter flower spike that arches over the plant and produces a smaller number of smaller flowers that tend to be very intensely pigmented in colour, very waxy, and are sequential bloomers. So they'll open a few flowers, keep them for sort of a month or so, and then drop them and open up some more buds. They'll have more buds in waiting so that they are ready to reflower as soon as that old flower has dropped, or even beforehand, so that you never have a gap in flowering, pretty much for the whole summer season actually. Several of these are new acquisitions, but the bellina, the violacea alba and the samira are ones that I've had in my care for much longer and are doing really great. And one thing that I would say is that the Novelty hybrid Phalaenopsis, or the species Phalaenopsis, seem to require slightly brighter light than the complex hybrid Phalaenopsis. Obviously this should be approached with caution as you don't want to burn your orchids, but in my experience the species and Novelty hybrid Phalaenopsis do need a little bit more light than their complex hybrid counterparts. They also seem to enjoy a little bit more moisture than the complex hybrid Phalaenopsis. Indeed, the traditional media that's used for the species Phalaenopsis seems to be moss, whereas often you'll buy complex hybrid Phalaenopsis in bark. Although I would say that they can do very well in moss as well, it seems to be more commonly used media for the Novelty hybrids and species, and this is reflected in their apparently increased need for moisture, which I manage by keeping most of mine in a semi-hydro or self-watering setup. They do particularly like to be kept moist from my observations in my environment, and do bear that in mind that my environment is a warmer, kind of drier environment. But those are some differences that I've really noticed between the complex hybrid Phalaenopsis and the closer to species Phalaenopsis. Another difference, which you'll be pleased to hear about, is the fragrance. Often these Novelty Phalaenopsis are hybridized with Polychilos subgenus, such as the bellina and the violacea, and they are often fragrant. Now the fragrance is different between whether the hybrid came from the bellina or the violacea, and the violacea has an incredible cinnamony smell. This is the violacea alba that you see in front of you, currently with 2 buds open, which I just love. But behind it we have a hybrid with the violacea, which takes more of the classic violacea colour from its parent. Now this is the Phalaenopsis Shinga Pure Love, and the smell for both of these is very cinnamony, but for the violacea itself, the pure species, I would say that the smell is more floral and cinnamony. It's a really beautiful floral smell, just with hints of kind of cinnamon and spiciness, but it's also very sweet. It's a really lovely scent. Whereas the Shinga Pure Love is only around 60% violacea. However, the smell is incredibly intense. The way that the hybridizers have bred the fragrance is incredible. I'm not sure how they've made it more intense than the violacea, but it is. It's so intensely cinnamon, but it's also very sweet. It's kind of like, at times it's like sticking your nose into a pot of cinnamon. At other times it's more like cinnamon cookies or cinnamon sugar. It's a really beautiful fragrance, so definitely one to add to any collection. The bellina herself isn't actually open at the moment, so I can't compare the fragrance directly, but the Samira has a much more fruity, soft scent than the violacea, so I'm looking forward to comparing that with the bellina. The Samira here is a hybrid between the bellina and the violacea, so it inherits traits from both parents, so hopefully that extends to smell in terms of the bellina, and if it does, then I can't wait, because I absolutely love the fragrance of the Samira. It's a really nice combination between the violacea and the bellina, in my opinion. And the other type of fragrant note that you'll get from the closer to species Phalaenopsis is very citrusy. So the Phalaenopsis dragon tree eagle here and the Phalaenopsis KS happy eagle crossed with Princess Kaiulani here both have a very citrusy, lemony fragrance, which is absolutely delicious. And this is quite similar to the Phalaenopsis Sweet Memory Eleodoro, but a little bit more intense and a little bit more lemony and a little bit sweeter also. So that is one of the main attractions, I think, along with the highly pigmented flowers and the waxy glossiness of the flowers compared to the complex hybrid Phalaenopsis. They are slightly slower growers and they require, I think, higher temperatures also. So the species primary hybrid Phalaenopsis tend to grow a lot more during the warmer months, and during the cooler months they will kind of slow down growing quite a lot. They only flower during the summer. They're not like the complex hybrid Phalaenopsis in that they will induce flowering at any time of year or as the weather starts to cool down and there's a temperature differential which will induce a lot of Phalaenopsis flowering. The summer blooming species, as the name implies, only bloom in the summer, and this trait extends to their primary hybrids. So in general, the species and primary hybrid or novelty Phalaenopsis require warmer temperatures, more moisture, and have more distinct growth periods than the complex hybrid Phalaenopsis. If I just bring you in on the bloom of the Princess Kaiulani, I'm sure you will not be disappointed with just how beautiful she is. She almost glistens as the light hits her in an almost metallic fashion. So this is a hybrid I would definitely recommend if you can get your hands on it. It's absolutely stunning in its coloration and its kind of metallic sheen that it has, almost like burnished metal. It's absolutely beautiful. So this is the Phalaenopsis KS Happy Eagle crossed with Princess Kaiulani. So that is my general kind of care tips for both the Phalaenopsis complex hybrids and the Phalaenopsis species. I hope that has been informative, and if you've got any questions at all, please do leave a comment down below. There are probably things that I've missed out from this care tutorial, and I'm sure I will follow that up with another video because it's such a large topic. But I'm sure that for many of us, the Phalaenopsis has a permanent place in our hearts as an orchid that we started off with and continues to hold a fantastic place in our collections. So if you enjoyed this video and want to see more from me, then give this video a like or subscribe to my channel for regular orchid updates. Do please leave a comment down below if you've got any questions. I really enjoy talking to other people about orchids and answering questions about how I care for them. And do bear in mind that the care advice that I've given is based on my environment and things can differ. So if you've got any queries regarding that, then obviously leave a comment and we'll have a discussion about it, because I absolutely love talking to other people about orchids and hearing your feedback and your comments. And I think that's why YouTube is such a great platform for orchid care videos, because you get an interaction that you just wouldn't get if you googled how to care for a Phalaenopsis. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you guys later. Bye!